In 2025, President Trump's aggressive trade policies sent shockwaves through the global economy, marking the beginning of a new era of trade disruption. The administration's decision to escalate tariffs was met with both fierce criticism and fervent support at home. But the international response was swift and severe. Sweeping tariffs were imposed on imports from nearly every nation, targeting a vast array of goods, from electronics and automobiles to raw materials and, crucially, energy resources. Ports that once bustled with the steady flow of global commerce now faced bottlenecks and uncertainty, as customs officers scrambled to enforce the new rules. The move, intended to protect American manufacturing and revive domestic industries, instead unleashed chaos across multiple sectors, none more so than energy. Factories struggled to source affordable materials, and oil refineries faced unpredictable supply disruptions leading to layoffs and production slowdowns. Key partners like Canada and Qatar, whose economies are deeply intertwined with the U.S. energy market, were hit especially hard. Canadian oil fields and Qatari LNG facilities, once reliable sources for American energy needs, suddenly found themselves facing steep new barriers to entry. The tariffs disrupted decades-old supply chains, threatening America's energy security and straining diplomatic ties. Oil pipelines and shipping routes that had long symbolized cooperation now became flashpoints for tension, as diplomats scrambled to renegotiate terms and prevent further escalation. Canada, America's largest and most dependable energy supplier, faced steep tariffs that forced its leaders to reconsider the nation's economic alignment. Canadian officials debated new trade strategies, while workers in the oil industry worried about their future and the stability of cross-border partnerships. Qatar, a global leader in liquefied natural gas, also encountered new barriers. The sudden shift in trade policy sent shockwaves through global energy markets, causing price volatility and uncertainty for countries dependent on Qatari exports. As energy costs soared for American households and businesses, the world braced for a dramatic realignment in global trade and energy. The ripple effects of these policies were felt far beyond U.S. borders, signaling a profound transformation in the way nations approached economic cooperation and competition. The tariff war escalated rapidly, beginning in February 2025 with a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports. By July, tariffs expanded to 90 more countries, including major energy producers, with rates ranging from 10% to 50%. Canada's tariff jumped to 35%, signaling the administration's hardline stance, even against close allies. The removal of the de minimis exemption meant nearly every import faced duties, upending business planning. As legal challenges mounted, the global economy was left navigating a volatile, unpredictable trade landscape. Canada, the top energy supplier to the U.S., has long been a cornerstone of North American energy security. Its vast reserves of oil and natural gas, stretching across the prairies and deep into the Arctic, have powered American homes, industries, and transportation for decades. But in a sudden and dramatic turn, Canada found itself facing crippling tariffs on oil and gas exports to its southern neighbor. These new trade barriers sent shockwaves through the energy sector, disrupting a relationship that had been stable for generations. With 60% of U.S. oil imports and nearly all imported natural gas coming from Canada, the stakes were enormous. The U.S. depended on Canadian energy to keep its economy running, while Canada relied on the American market for its prosperity. The tariffs slashed Canadian competitiveness overnight, threatening an economy where 77% of exports head south. Oil companies scrambled to find new buyers, but the infrastructure simply wasn't there. Canada's energy infrastructure, built almost exclusively for north-south trade, left few alternatives for redirecting exports. Pipelines and railways pointed toward the U.S., not overseas. The pain quickly spread beyond energy. Industries like timber, auto parts, and manufacturing, all deeply integrated with the U.S. market, felt the squeeze as tariffs and uncertainty rippled through supply chains. Additional tariffs on steel and aluminum raised costs for energy infrastructure projects, compounding the crisis. Canadian companies faced higher expenses just as their revenues were falling. The result was a double blow. Canada's economy faltered, with the Canadian dollar dropping and layoffs mounting, while the U.S. faced new risks to its own energy security. The tariffs, intended to protect American industry, ended up destabilizing its most reliable supplier, straining a partnership that had underpinned prosperity on both sides of the border for decades. Canada responded with defiance, considering even the drastic step of restricting energy exports to the U.S. The economic fallout was immediate. Canada's economy shrank, and consumers felt the pinch at the checkout. Retaliatory tariffs targeted key U.S. goods, but Canada's dependence on the American market limited their impact. Policymakers shifted focus to damage control and finding new export markets. The crisis sparked a national debate on reducing reliance on fossil fuel exports and the U.S. market. Calls grew for economic diversification and investment in greener alternatives. The trade war, though painful, may accelerate Canada's push for a more resilient, independent future. The trade war's reach extended far beyond manufactured goods, touching even the world's largest LNG exporters. Qatar, a global LNG powerhouse, suddenly found itself facing a 10% tariff on shipments to the U.S., a move that sent shockwaves through the industry and raised urgent questions about the future of energy trade. For a nation whose economy is deeply intertwined with energy exports, this was more than just a financial setback, it was a direct challenge to its strategic ambitions. For Qatar, any new barrier threatened its hard-won U.S. market share and complicated the careful long-term planning that underpins massive LNG projects. Energy executives scrambled to reassess contracts, while government officials pored over market data, searching for ways to adapt to the new reality. The uncertainty made it difficult to predict future revenues or justify new investments, casting a shadow over the country's economic outlook. The tariffs also risked alienating key Middle Eastern allies, undermining decades of energy cooperation that had been painstakingly built through diplomacy and shared interests. Regional leaders, once confident in their partnerships with the West, now questioned the reliability of these alliances. The sense of trust that had fueled joint ventures and cross-border projects began to erode, threatening the stability of the global energy network. As U.S. LNG imports became pricier, American consumers, especially those in energy-dependent regions like New England, felt the impact directly in their wallets. Higher tariffs translated into increased energy bills, making it harder for families to heat their homes during harsh winters. Local utilities, caught between rising costs and regulatory pressures, struggled to balance supply and affordability. The uncertainty in the U.S. market pushed Qatar and other LNG exporters to look elsewhere for stability. Europe and Asia, with their growing energy needs and more predictable trade environments, became increasingly attractive destinations. New contracts were signed, and shipping routes were redrawn, as exporters sought to reduce their exposure to U.S. policy swings. America's reputation as a reliable trade partner suffered a blow, opening doors for rivals eager to fill the void. Countries and companies that once prioritized U.S. partnerships began to hedge their bets, forging new alliances and diversifying their supply chains. The global energy landscape was suddenly more competitive and more uncertain than ever before. For energy producers and investors, the unpredictability of U.S. policy made long-term investments riskier and less attractive. Projects that once promised steady returns were now fraught with uncertainty, leading some companies to delay or even cancel major developments. Financial analysts warned of increased volatility, and boardrooms across the industry braced for a period of turbulence. The result? A potential realignment of global energy flows with lasting geopolitical consequences. As trade routes shift and new alliances form, the world's energy map is being redrawn, setting the stage for a new era of competition and cooperation in the LNG market. The tariffs quickly backfired at home, driving up prices for fuel, groceries, cars, and construction materials. American businesses, especially those reliant on imported steel and aluminum, faced soaring costs and shrinking competitiveness. The energy sector, ironically, was hit by higher infrastructure costs, stalling growth and innovation. Promised job gains failed to materialize. Instead, job losses mounted in industries hurt by rising costs and lost export markets. Retaliatory tariffs from Canada and others further squeezed American farmers and exporters. Uncertainty rattled markets and discouraged investment as businesses struggled to plan for the future. The gamble for economic security left American consumers and businesses navigating a turbulent, unpredictable landscape. The trade war erupted as global emissions climbed and climate action stalled. U.S.-Canada energy trade fueled soaring emissions, with both nations sharing responsibility for the climate impact. Some analysts argued tariffs could act like a carbon tax, making carbon-intensive imports less attractive. For Canada, the shock may spur investment in renewables and economic diversification. Yet, the tariffs also risked carbon leakage, shifting emissions elsewhere and making clean energy projects more expensive. The overall climate impact remains uncertain as the trade war disrupts both fossil fuel and green energy markets. The chaos may pressure change, but it's a blunt, unpredictable tool for climate progress. The 2025 tariff war has produced more losers than winners. North America's integrated economy is fractured, Canada faces recession, and US consumers and businesses bear higher costs. Global allies are alienated, and America's reputation as a reliable partner is damaged. The biggest casualty may be climate cooperation, as division replaces unity. Short-term gains for a few US industries are outweighed by broader economic harm. America's rivals stand to benefit, filling the void left by a more insular US. The pending Supreme Court decision could reshape the future, but uncertainty reigns. The oil shockwaves of 2025 are a stark lesson in the unpredictable consequences of tearing up the global trade rulebook.